another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Julian Wong, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Saturday/Sunday, April 4th to 5th, 2026 issues of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Iran downs 2 U.S. warplanes, triggering frantic rescue mission. Iran downed 2 U.S. warplanes on Friday, the first time Tehran has downed American jets during the war, setting off a search and rescue effort that left 2 service members safe and 1 still missing. Iran's downing of the warplanes is the most striking evidence yet that despite enormous military losses, Tehran can still significantly raise the cost of continuing the conflict for the United States and Israel. The shootdowns were the most successful demonstration of Iran's military strategy to inflict tactical defeats on the United States and its allies, in hopes not of winning militarily, but of surviving and sapping their will to continue to fight. An F-15E fighter and A-10 attack plane were the first U.S. or Israeli aircraft to be downed by Iran in thousands of sorties flown in Iranian airspace over the month plus of the war. A massive search and rescue effort extricated 1 crew member of the F-15E, but at least 1 additional crew member was unaccounted for. The A-10 wasn't brought down in Iranian territory, people familiar with the incident said. The pilot of the twin-engine, single-seat attack jet was able to fly out of Iranian territory before ejecting from the aircraft and being rescued, they said. The question is how much such blows weaken President Trump. Specifically, his resolve to continue, and even to expand, the war at a time when he already appeared determined to bring it to a rapid close. It definitely shows that Iran can win without winning, said Alan Ayer, a former State Department Iran expert and fellow with the Middle East Institute. The United States narrative is, we've got everything in the bag. This punctures that narrative. Instead of seeking to fight the United States and Israel toe-to-toe, Iran has adopted an asymmetric strategy, targeting Arab Gulf states, knocking out radars and other facilities critical to air defenses, and shutting down most tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. It is a tactic that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the powerful Iranian faction running the war effort, also used to kill thousands of American troops in Iraq using improvised explosive devices. The air campaign has pounded Iranian missile bases and mobile launchers, but Tehran has been able to fire dozens of missiles and drones a day, prolonging the conflict, raising the economic costs on oil exporting Gulf countries and in the United States, and surviving to fight another day. What it hadn't done until Friday was bring down any United States and Israeli warplanes over its territory. Iranian state television said Iranians would be rewarded for finding any American crew members and turning them over alive. Even with the United States rescue effort still underway and the fate of the United States crew member uncertain, Iran's parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, posted a mocking statement on social media, suggesting the United States war aims had suffered a major blow. This brilliant no-strategy war they started has now been downgraded from regime change to, hey, can anyone find our pilots, he wrote. Wow, what incredible progress. Absolute geniuses. The successful attacks came on the same day that Iranian officials told mediators it isn't willing to meet U.S. officials in Islamabad in the coming days, and that the White House's far-reaching demands for ending the war are unacceptable. William Wexler, a former Defense Department official who heads Middle East programs at the Atlantic Council think tank, said the incidents showed that while we have achieved air superiority, we have not achieved air supremacy. The IRGC is a professional military organization with a proven capacity to learn and adapt, and obviously retains capabilities that put our airmen and other military personnel at risk, Wexler said. The war could quickly spiral out of control, even with the vast superiority of the American military, he added. The war will go on for some time, and further escalations are increasingly likely, either intentional or accidental, he said. And nobody should be confused. There are lots of ways that this war could escalate further very quickly. The loss of the warplanes comes after 13,000 combat flights and 5 weeks of airstrikes. Former Air Force officials say that such an incident hasn't happened until now, underscored the successful United States efforts to suppress Iran's air defenses early in the war. What's amazing about this story is that it hasn't happened sooner, said retired Air Force Lieutenant General Dave Deptula, who ran the air campaign for the 1900 to 1991 Gulf War against Iraq. There have been thousands of targets hit with thousands of sorties penetrating contested airspace. It's been an entire month, and this is the first time we've had a combat loss. That's incredible. Trump was briefed on the aircraft shootdowns, said White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. He threatened in recent days to bombard Iran back to the Stone Ages, and over the past 24 hours, the United States and Iran have been trading attacks on military and civilian infrastructure in the region. Trump has ordered thousands of Marines and soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East. I think it's time. Inside Bondi's ouster. Washington. On Wednesday morning, Attorney General Pam Bondi descended the sun-splashed steps of the White House with President Trump, smiling at him just before entering the presidential limousine for a 2-mile ride to the Supreme Court. It was on that short ride in The Beast when Bondi learned she was being removed from her job. During the drive, Trump told her, "I think it's time." She would later tell an associate. The ensuing hours were as awkward and chaotic as Bondi's 14-month tenure as the nation's top law enforcement official. Trump and Bondi briefly sat near each other during the Supreme Court hearing on birthright citizenship, but the president soon switched chairs. Later, Bondi would ask Trump if she could keep her job until the summer. The president declined. Trump had decided earlier in the week that he was replacing her. He was frustrated she didn't do more to contain fallout from the department's handling of the Jeffrey Epstein investigative files, and incensed that she had not successfully prosecuted a number of his political enemies. Trump, a Republican, has floated Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin as Attorney General to other advisors, but hasn't decided on anyone, according to White House officials. He is also interested in evaluating how soon-to-be interim Attorney General Todd Blanche performs, they said. Bondi and Trump had talked about her leaving since around the beginning of the year, according to a person familiar with the discussions, and he had regularly expressed dissatisfaction with the speed at which she handled his agenda. She is expected to leave the Justice Department in about a month. On numerous occasions, she seemed to go out of her way to appease him. launching what many prosecutors in the department viewed as weak probes of Trump's favored targets. Some of those cases were later blocked by judges or grand juries. The Justice Department even had a giant banner with Trump's face on it hung on its main building, an unprecedented move that illustrated his control over the agency. Last week, she appointed a prosecutor to look into allegations of election fraud in 2020 in a bid to address another gripe the president had. It was never enough. Some people close to Trump and Bondi said it wasn't a single issue that led to her dismissal, but a steady drip of frustrations, including what Trump saw as a lack of positive news coverage on the Justice Department. In addition to Zeldin and Blanche, other names have been floated as potential successors. They include U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican, has been previously mentioned for the job, but the term-limited governor has some high-profile detractors close to the president. Bondi's eventual ouster built for months. Still, the swiftness in which it came, just 1 month after he fired another cabinet member, Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, delivered another shock through Washington. Trump had spent the first year of his presidency trying to avoid personnel shakeups. Now, he is contending with low approval ratings, increasingly dim midterm election forecasts, rising gas prices, and the war in Iran. The Wall Street Journal reported in January that Trump's frustration with Bondi was nearly constant. He had mused to allies that he was thinking of appointing special counsels to pick up some of the work he felt she wasn't doing. At one point, he showed White House visitors printouts of social media posts from conservatives trashing his attorney general. When one ally mentioned Bondi's name in a casual setting at a sporting event in January, Trump unleashed into a diatribe, saying she was doing a terrible job and expressing frustration he chose her for Attorney General. Earlier this year, Bondi rallied other senior figures in the administration and Congress to support her publicly and with Trump privately. This brought her more time, largely because the president was personally fond of her, officials said, but he remained unhappy. The Attorney General told others she constantly felt pressure from Trump to deliver more than was possible, and that some of his demands were outside of things she could do. The president also regularly heard from outside advisors that Bondi wasn't aggressive enough. Two officials said the criticism sometimes came from Boris Epshteyn, the president's personal lawyer who often speaks to Trump. Trump had long envisioned more of a bulldog in the role. His first pick was Matt Gaetz, the hard-changing former GOP congressman from Florida who became ensnared in an investigation into sexual misconduct and faced impossible odds at Senate confirmation. Bondi was a trusted fallback with an easy Southern demeanor and many years in public office. Still, she has been known to be sensitive to criticism. The Epstein controversy weighed on her especially, friends said. Some of that was her own doing, but at other times, while White House officials felt Bondi faced unfair attacks. While Bondi has been stung by the dismissal, she had been heartened by support she has received and a flood of job offers that have come in recent weeks as rumors grew. Pam Bondi is a great American patriot and a loyal friend who faithfully served as my Attorney General, Trump wrote on social media, avoiding the public vitriol he was used in past dismissals. Reached by text on Thursday, Bondi replied with a short note. It's all so positive, alluding to her next role. When asked for a comment, a White House spokeswoman referred to Trump's post. Some White House officials tried to paper over any fallout between the two longtime friends. Bondi is scheduled to testify before Congress under oath April 14th about the Epstein case, so she could soon be back in the news. You were listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The Epstein Files. Bondi was narrowly confirmed by the Senate for her job, winning the backing of just one Democrat, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. She shared Trump's view that the Biden administration had wielded the Justice Department to target him and other Republicans, and she promised to change course, saying it would be an independent branch of government that wouldn't pursue political enemies. "This is not about targeting," she said at the CPAC convention in Maryland 2 weeks after becoming Attorney General in February of 2025. "This is not about weaponization. This is about keeping This is about keeping America safe, going forward, and prosecuting violent criminals." Bondi was a seasoned state prosecutor, having served as Florida's Attorney General, but she had a habit of slip-ups. One day after her CPAC appearance, she suggested in a Fox interview that she had a folder on her desk of Epstein's clients. "It's sitting on my desk right now to review," she said. "That's been a directive by President Trump. I'm reviewing that." The comment excited many in Trump's base, who had believed for years that such a list existed and contained the names of powerful Democrats. Bondi later said she was referring to Epstein files awaiting her review, not a specific client list. They hoped Bondi would finally be the one to bring it to light. Senior White House aides had no idea what Bondi was talking about. That comment would haunt her. White House officials began asking Bondi to secure approval before television hits related to Epstein. She argued internally against releasing more information about the Epstein files, administration officials said, and told lawmakers it was just child pornography that nobody wants to see, said Representative Thomas Massie, a Kentucky Republican who met with Bondi in April of 2025. In July, the FBI and Justice Department said they wouldn't release more, setting in motion a chain of events that led Congress to pass a law mandating the department produce more. Trump blamed Bondi for keeping his relationship with Epstein in the news, even though he repeatedly denied wrongdoing and said the files exonerated him. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles told Vanity Fair in a piece published in December that Bondi didn't appreciate how passionate some supporters were about the Epstein files. Many conservatives never forgave Bondi, and Trump regularly raised her handling of the issue with top White House officials and allies, according to people familiar with the matter. The Epstein case would lead to some of the biggest cracks that have yet formed in Trump's conservative coalition. Bondi promised at February 2025 CPAC convention that the weaponization of the Justice Department wouldn't continue. Yet soon she found herself under constant pressure to investigate and prosecute people Trump deemed to be his political enemies. This list would include former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James, among others. Amid Trump's frustration over the pace of the probes, the department also stepped up its scrutiny of other Trump targets, including former CIA Director John Brennan and left-wing organizations. Trump's anger over prosecutions with Bondi wasn't contained in private. It accidentally spilled out in September when the president posted on social media what had been intended to be a private message for Bondi, urging her to bring charges against Comey and other targets. "We can't delay any longer. "It's killing our reputation," Trump wrote. The post upset Bondi, who immediately began calling senior White House officials allies and even Trump. A number of federal prosecutors expressed reservations about launching criminal probes of Trump's perceived enemies, based on what they viewed to be directives from the president rather than strong evidence. The White House moved to install hand-picked replacements who might be more accommodating. The tactic led to indictments against Comey and James, but both were dismissed by a judge who said the former Trump aide behind the cases, Lindsay Halligan, was unlawfully appointed as the interim U.S. Attorney in Eastern Virginia. Pam Bondi used the machinery of federal law enforcement not to pursue justice, but to carry out political vendettas at the direction of the president. Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat, said Thursday. Her firing today is long overdue, but it does not erase the damage done, and it does not absolve her of accountability. Hiring posts big surprise rebound in March. Unemployment rate declined to 4.3%. Gains are attributed to healthcare sector. The United States added 178,000 jobs in March, the Labor Department said Friday, a resilient rebound that blew past expectations and defied concerns about a possible downturn. March's job gains marked the best month for growth in more than a year, and were far better than February, when the U.S. lost more than 130,000 jobs. Last month's numbers also beat the gain of 59,000 jobs that economists polled by the Wall Street Journal had expected to see. The unemployment rate fell to 4.3% from February's 4.4%. The decline in the unemployment rate came with an asterisk. The labor force shrank by nearly 400,000 people, meaning fewer people were counted as unemployed. The share of people working or looking for work slipped to 61.9%, its lowest level since the fall of 2021. We should all be rooting for a higher participation rate, said Henry McVeigh, head of global macro and asset allocation at private equity firm KKR. You're in a solid but not spectacular growth environment. Investors took the latest job numbers in stride, in part because many markets, including stocks in the United States and Europe, were closed for Good Friday. Treasury yields edged higher as the healthier labor report was viewed as more likely to spur inflation and less likely to convince the Federal Reserve to cut interest rates. The benchmark 10-year Treasury yield ended the day slightly above 4.34%, up from a 4.31% on Thursday. The February jobs number, meanwhile, was worse than previously reported. The Labor Department said that the economy lost 133,000 jobs in February, after previously estimating a loss of 92,000 jobs. I always tell people to look not just at the latest month, but to ask, what's been the picture for the past 3 or 4 months, said Gus Foucher, chief economist at PNC Financial Services. When you look at the broader picture, we're adding jobs at a slower pace than a couple years ago, but we are adding jobs, and it's enough to keep the unemployment rate steady. All told, the economy has created an average of 15,000 jobs each month over the past half year. That is a big downshift from the same period a year earlier, when the United States was adding 78,000 jobs on average each month. The United States has lost jobs in 5 of the past 12 months. The job gains were driven by a big rebound for the healthcare and social assistance sectors. It added about 90,000 jobs in March. That was a reversal from February, when a large West Coast strike sidelined tens of thousands of workers. The rebound in jobs also looked as if it reflected an improvement in the weather from February, noted Jefferies economist Thomas Simmons. That helped the leisure and hospitality and construction sectors. Leisure and hospitality added 44,000 jobs. Construction added 26,000. Manufacturing employment rose by 15,000. One of the few weak spots was the public sector. Federal government payrolls lost 18,000 jobs, more than offsetting net hiring by local agencies. Hiring was weathered a complicated set of cross-currents over the past year. But Friday's data confirms that the labor market hasn't been derailed. Last year, uncertainty about big changes to trade, immigration, and tax policy put many companies into hold-steady mode, delaying big hiring and layoff decisions until the picture becomes clearer. At the same time, the Trump administration's immigration crackdown has reduced the number of available workers. So the economy no longer needs to add as many jobs to keep the same share of workers employed. The war in Iran means the economy is now facing a new set of challenges, and most economists think that the March jobs data arrived too early to see the effects. The sharp rise in oil prices raises costs and could yield more in inflation, but it could also strain household budgets and drag down demand. Because hiring plans are often made months in advance, the March numbers probably don't give a clear read on how these effects will play out. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said this past week that the Iran war raises the risk that the central bank might have to choose between fighting inflation and shoring up the labor market, but that it isn't facing that trade-off yet. Friday's data rammed that point home. The Fed was already planning to hold rates steady at its coming April 28th and 29th meeting because elevated oil prices and underlying inflation around 3% had closed the door to cuts regardless. But the March jobs data relieve officials of the harder question looming behind that decision: whether a weakening labor market would eventually force them to consider cutting even with inflation uncomfortably high. DOJ bid to revive Fed subpoenas is rejected by judge. A federal judge denied the Justice Department's request to reconsider his decision to quash a pair of subpoenas issued to the Federal Reserve, rejecting the government's arguments in a sharply worded 6-page opinion. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg said the government neither offered new evidence nor identified any material error in his March ruling, which found that the subpoenas served as part of U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro's investigation into Fed Chair Jerome Powell were improper. Pirro had immediately promised to appeal the ruling and filed a motion asking Boasberg to reconsider last month. Prosecutors in her office argued Boasberg had applied the wrong legal standard by unduly limiting their authority to seek evidence of a crime. But Boasberg said Friday the government had ignored the thrust of his initial ruling, that the subpoena power didn't extend to investigating someone for an improper purpose. Boasberg concluded in his original ruling that the purpose of the subpoenas was to pressure Powell into lowering interest rates or resigning, not to pursue a legitimate criminal investigation after months of demands from President Trump for rate cuts. The ruling clears the way for Pirro to appeal the decision to a higher court. But that appeal threatens to delay the confirmation of Kevin Warsh, the former Fed governor whom Trump nominated to replace Powell when his term expires next month. Senator Thom Tillis, Republican from North Carolina, has said he won't advance any federal nomination while the probe continues, depriving Republicans of the votes needed to push Warsh through the Senate Banking Committee. You were listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Drivers celebrate the demise of the car feature they hate most. Stop Start helps lower emissions and raise Americans' blood pressure. Of the many firsts in Mike Donio's life, the first time he met his wife, the first steps taken by his daughter, there's one that really grinds his gears. Years ago, Donio stepped into a rental car, put it in drive, and quickly felt the engine click off when he hit his first stop sign. I was startled, and then I realized what it was, he said, recalling his first experience with the stop-start engine feature that has become the bane of many Americans' driving existence. I searched frantically for the button to shut it off, Donio, 53, said. I just started hitting stuff until I found it. He's been shutting it off ever since. Drivers have long wanted to put a permanent stopper on stop-start. Designed to lower auto emissions by temporarily shutting off the engine while the brake is engaged, it also makes driving feel unnatural, jerky, and unenjoyable, Donio and his fellow stop-start haters argue. The technology was developed decades ago, but federal incentives during the Obama administration kicked United States adoption into high gear. The Environmental Protection Agency began tracking stop-start technology in 2012 car models, less than 1% of which had the feature. By 2024, roughly 58% of new gasoline non-hybrid cars had the systems installed. As the uptick accelerated, so did the annoyance. With many vehicles automatically set to stop and then start with every new ride, some people got creative. Some regularly put their cars in sports mode, which in some models disables the engine from shutting off when the car is idle. Others installed products like the AutoStop Eliminator, which at $99.99 for some car models will disable stop-start without drivers having to lift a finger. This year, stop-start resistors finally found their champion, President Trump. His administration in February repealed an Obama-era scientific finding that served as the legal basis for federal greenhouse gas. EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin announced the agency was eliminating the federal credits that contributed to stop-start's widespread adoption. The official White House account on X celebrated with a meme video of a Prius-style car standing still at a stoplight, its engine shut off, and two sweaty occupants baking inside. Meanwhile, a petite blonde woman speeds off in a red sports car. Keeping cool while making America hot again. Auto stop-start is officially dead, the tweet read. Research has indicated automatic start-stop systems improve fuel economy anywhere from 5 to 26%, depending on factors such as the length and location of the trip. Given the benefits, not everyone is on board with the popular grievances. It saves you money, one Reddit user wrote around the time of the EPA decision. Why turn it off or remove it? For Donio, being anti-stop-start doesn't mean he's against all environmentally friendly auto features. The software developer from Woolwich Township, New Jersey, also owns a Hyundai Ioniq 5, which is fully electric. He likes not having to fill up on gas. The other big perk, there's no combustion engine to stop and then start back up. But Donio isn't giving up his 2020 Audi A4, which he enjoys despite it having the feature he despises. He simply slides the car into sport or manual mode. It's not a button, he said. It's just part of the gear shift. For others, stop-start has deadened the joy of driving. Alek Komornitsky, a self-described retired longtime computer nerd from the Republic of Boulder, Colorado, has been a Subaru driver since 1998. But when he got his 2024 Outback, the stop-start feature quickly turned him off. "It's super noticeable," said Komarnitsky, 62. "The car makes noise and it has some vibration." His younger brother, who lives outside Seattle, also can't stand stop-start, including in his 2022 Outback, with all the fancy bells and whistles and cameras. "You got other things on your mind than worrying about the car, turning it off and turning it on," said Kurt Komarnitsky, 60, who is often on the road. Another thing they can agree on, the compounding effect of start-stop annoyance. Alec estimated the time it took the engine to start back up was about a quarter of a second. Kurt added, "It doesn't seem like a quarter of a second, it seems like a lot longer than that." Alec responded, "It's not 5 seconds, but it's notable. I'm trying to make that left turn, and the car, I'm like, is it going to go?" The moment right after the light turns green is the most painful for Antonio Fernandez, too. It takes away a little bit of the handling, the North Canton, Ohio resident said of his 2023 Jeep Grand Cherokee as it starts back up. The feature bothers him so much that he brought it up to his family around Thanksgiving last year, expecting to commiserate with his mother, brother, sister, and his brother-in-law, me. He seemed disappointed when none of us were as annoyed as he was. We piled into the Jeep, which he had just purchased, to get to dinner one night. He happily showed off the vehicle, except, of course, his stop-start. When Trump later made the announcements to kill the feature, he was delighted. "It wasn't like one of those things where we were, partying in the streets," he said. "It was just nice." College student takes on cybercrime. Benjamin Brundage helped solve the mystery of a massive cyber weapon. Sitting in his dorm room at the Rochester Institute of Technology, Benjamin Brundage was closing in on a mystery that had even seasoned internet investigators baffled. A cat meme helped him crack the case. A growing network of hacked devices was launching the biggest cyber attacks ever seen on the internet. It had become the most powerful cyber weapon ever assembled, large enough to knock a state or even a small country offline. Investigators didn't know exactly who had built it or how. Brundage had been following the attacks too, and in between classes was conducting his own investigation. In September, the college seniors started messaging online with an anonymous user who seemed to have insider knowledge. As they chatted on Discord, a platform favored by video gamers, Brundage was eager to get more information, but he didn't want to come off as too serious and shut down the conversation. So every now and then he'd send a funny gift to lighten the mood. Brundage was fluent in the memes, jokes, and technical jargon popular with young gamers and hackers who were extremely online. It was a bit of just asking over and over again, and then like being a bit unserious, said Brundage. At one point, he asked for some technical details. He followed up with the cat meme, a 6-second clip that showed a hand adjusting a necktie on a fluffy gray cat. Brundage didn't expect it to work, but he got the information. "It took me by surprise," he said. Eventually, the leaker hinted there was a new vulnerability on the internet. Brundage, who was 22, would learn it threatened tens of millions of consumers and as much as a quarter of the world's corporations. As he unraveled the mystery, he impressed veteran researchers with his findings, including federal law enforcement, which took action against the network 2 weeks ago. Chad Seaman, a researcher at Akamai, joked at one point that the internet could go down if Brundage spent too much time on his exams. 3 times a year, several hundred of the techies who keep North America's internet running gather to talk shop. Last June, they met at a conference in Denver hosted by the North American Network Operators Group. One major topic was a fast-growing and often legally dubious business known as residential proxy networks. Dozens of companies around the world run such networks, which are made up of consumer devices like phones, computers, and video players. These res proxy companies rent out access to internet connections on the devices to customers who want to look like they're surfing the internet from a genuine home address. That kind of access is useful for people who want privacy, or for companies that want to masquerade as regular people to test out internet features for particular regions, or scrape the web for data, say a shopping price comparison site. AI companies use the networks to get around blocks on automated traffic so they can gather large amounts of data to train their models. Then, there are the customers who want to hide their identity while engaging in ticket scalping, bank fraud, bomb threats, child exploitation, hacking, or espionage. Some device owners willingly sign up to be on these networks so they can make a few dollars a month, but most have no idea they're connected to one. At the Denver conference, Craig Labowitz was alarmed. The Nokia executive had been tracking the data flows of the internet's infrastructure for years, and he knew the network's data centers, choke points, as well as design better than most. Starting in January of 2025, Nokia's sensors had picked up a series of increasingly powerful cyber attacks coming from devices that hadn't previously been considered dangerous. Called distributed denial of service or DDoS attacks, these were massive floods of junk internet data designed to knock websites offline by overwhelming the data pipes that connected them. These attacks are sometimes launched by extortionists or even business rivals seeking to sabotage computer networks. The network, which would become known as Kimwolf, seemed to be using residential proxy connections to launch its attacks, giving it the potential to do massive damage. The basic message was, "Be afraid," Labowitz remembers. Kimwolf included a lot of residential proxy devices that were connected to an enigmatic Chinese company. But something didn't add up. While res proxy networks hosted plenty of malicious traffic, the companies running the networks generally discouraged DDoS attacks. Once a device started participating in a DDoS attack, it would get blacklisted by much of the internet, and that wasn't good for business. Benjamin Brundage hadn't always been a computer nerd. A self-described B student, he spent his childhood adventuring in the wilderness near his hometown of Seattle, and as a kid had preferred skiing to YouTube. Stuck indoors during the pandemic, Brundage turned to spending long hours on Minecraft, a build-your-own-world video game that, for many, is a gateway into programming. He learned to build modifications and cheats. Brundage found himself immersed in the online culture of trash-talking, memes, boyish jokes, and ultimately, hacking. "I was definitely messing with stuff I probably shouldn't have at such a young age," he said. He applied his hacking skills toward a legitimate cybersecurity research. In his senior year of high school, he found bugs in websites belonging to the Dutch government and reported them via a bug bounty program that offered hackers prizes for unearthing security flaws. A few months later, the Dutch National Cybersecurity Center mailed him his bounty, a black t-shirt. It read, "I hacked the Dutch government, and all I got was this lousy t-shirt." He remembers it as one of the most rewarding experiences of his young life. Inspired, Brundage became obsessed with web scrapers, automated programs that hover up vast amounts of web data for analysis. That led him to look into residential proxy networks. By the end of his college sophomore year, he was meticulously cataloging them. Like Nokia's Labovitz, he had become fixated on the Chinese company behind the Res proxy network connected to Kim Wolf. The company, called Epiday, didn't list a chief executive or founder on its website. It didn't even have an address. Epiday didn't respond to requests for comment for this article. A spokeswoman told the Wall Street Journal earlier this year that the company always explicitly opposed any form of illegal or abusive conduct on its network. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Brundage would get up at 4 a.m. and untangle the complex international network of consumer devices making up Epiday. Working at a desk in his dorm room, he spent hours identifying the IP addresses, numerical labels, similar to phone numbers assigned to devices connected to the network. Then he'd go to class. By August, he had created his own one-man company, Cynthian, and was selling his list of associated IP addresses to warn companies of fraud. He soon got a message on Discord saying his list was missing some IP addresses. "You can't detect all of them," the user wrote. "He's bragging," Brundage thought. It was time for the cat meme. Not long after, Brundage was chatting online with an anonymous cybersecurity researcher, who then introduced him to Chris Formosa, an engineer at the networking company Lumen. Formosa was part of a working group called Big Pipes, which included dozens of employees from some of the internet's most important service providers. When a DDoS attack happened, the Big Pipes wizards usually knew how the attack was being carried out and the software behind it. But Kim Wolf caught them flat-footed. It seemed to be using Epiday's network, but how? Were they a customer? Brundage told Formosa that he'd learned from his Discord chat and about how much of Epiday had already been mapped out. "I've been working on Epiday for almost 2 years, Formosa said. It was just wild to hear this college student had so much info on them. Within a week, Brundage was popping up on Big Pipes' weekly conference call, sharing what he knew. One of the companies participating in Big Pipes soon got hit with a cyber attack from Kim Wolf. Studying the data, engineers from the company realized that some of the malicious traffic was coming from an employee's home address. They tracked the source of the attack to a device, a digital picture frame. The frame had become part of Kim Wolf. But how? Brundage and the Big Pipes researchers spent weeks scouring the internet for more clues. Brundage joined Discord and Telegram channels devoted to web scraping and residential proxy servers. Eventually, he landed in a handful of channels that the Kim Wolf operators and their associates used. Sometimes Brundage would simply ask for information. Amazingly, he got answers. Kim Wolf's operators had a residential proxy network themselves that was somehow linked to Epiday's. Brundage learned that Kim Wolf's operators spent about $30,000 a month just to run the servers that were the brains of their botnet, or network of hacked computers. Seaman, the Akamai researcher and a Big Pipes member, couldn't believe what Brundage was picking up. By the end of October, Seaman had a pretty good idea of how Kim Wolf was sneaking onto Epiday's networks. Brundage wanted a smoking gun. Brundage installed Epiday's software, downloading it from a website that offered pirated streaming apps, and put it on an Android phone he could monitor. On November 16th, right in the middle of midterms, Brundage saw his phone communicating with a domain that Kim Wolf's creators had set up. Peeling back the layers, he and the Big Pipes team discovered a bug in Ippide's code. The Ippide software was a gateway for hackers. Ippide and Kim Wolf's operators weren't partners. Kim Wolf was paying for access to Ippide's residential proxy devices and installing their own residential proxy software on them that allowed DDoS attacks. They then sold access to paying customers, cybercrime as a service. Brundage has identified 11 of the largest residential proxy companies, including Ippide, that were vulnerable to the bug and began drafting emails to them explaining how to fix the problem. But first, he had to complete his finals. The day after his last test, on December 17th, Brundage sent out the emails. On the 26th, Brundage got an email from Ippide apologizing. His email had gone into a spam folder, but they were fixing the problem. The Ippide spokeswoman previously told the Journal the company once adopted relatively aggressive market expansion strategies, but later tightened up its business practices. On March 19th, federal authorities announced they had disrupted 4 of the world's largest DDoS botnets, including Kim Wolf. Kim Wolf had launched more than 26,000 DDoS attacks, targeting over 8,000 victims, according to a court filing. The press release announcing the takedown thanked Brundage's company, Cynthian, among others. Brundage recently got a text message from a federal official on the case. The official had heard about the bug bounty Brundage got from the Dutch government years ago and had a question. What's a good address to mail you a t-shirt, and what's your size? Sports. The NFL's playbook to avoid another officiating disaster. The league is on the verge of locking out its officials for the first time since 2012, when it used substandard replacement referees. It's hoping to avoid similar chaos. Phoenix. There are only 2 words any NFL fan needs to hear to remember the perils of a referee lockout. Fail Mary. It was the final play of a nationally televised Monday night game between the Green Bay Packers and the Seattle Seahawks back in 2012. Seattle trailed 12-7 when quarterback Russell Wilson unleashed a desperate heave to the end zone in the final seconds. What followed was a scrap between 2 players, including a Seahawks receiver who committed blatant pass interference. But after much disagreement, the replacement officials mistakenly awarded Seattle a touchdown and the victory. The play was such a black eye that it was widely credited with putting an end to the standoff between the NFL and its referees. But 14 years later, the league is barreling toward another potential lockout with its game officials. What we need to do is make sure we are prepared to succeed at this one person familiar with the league's thinking said. The worst thing that we can do is not do this well. As it stands, the 2 sides are haggling over both money and the NFL's vision for new measures that it believes would improve officiating quality. If they can't agree, the league has been mapping out contingencies that include fast-tracking officials from the collegiate level before the expiration of the current agreement on May 31st. The league is also expected to pass new rules that would give staff inside the NFL's Video Command Center in New York the authority to chime in with more penalty calls. With the sides still far apart and a deadline looming, the league's goal is to avoid a repeat of 2012 by crafting a blueprint based on lessons learned from everything that went wrong. Whether that can actually be avoided is another question. What we have learned when we studied 2012, the mistake there from the league's perspective, frankly, is we didn't start preparing for replacement football until too late, one person familiar with the league's thinking said. The backdrop to this dispute is a league where every single play is more closely scrutinized than ever. Improved camera angles make it clearer when officials are mistaken, and the widespread proliferation of legal sports betting, including prop bets, means that fans might have money on the line with every pass or run. Which means that anything resembling 2012 could be a nightmare for America's richest and most popular sport. Even before the Fail Mary, players, coaches, and fans had already grown frustrated with weeks of botched calls. Back then, the miscues included officials mistakenly awarding a team an extra timeout, a helmet-to-helmet that went uncalled despite knocking a receiver unconscious, and a game with so many questionable flags that announcer Al Michaels dubbed the fans' protests the loudest manure chant he had ever heard. The Fail Mary was merely the final straw. The debacle is the reason why the NFL's preparation for a potential lockout is now months ahead of where it was 14 years ago. Should it happen, the replacements will have several months of extra training, as the league also plans to deploy technology that wasn't even available in 2012. People familiar with the NFL's thinking say it's worth the fight because underperforming officials need more off-season instruction, and that performance should come ahead of seniority when it comes to determining which referees call the most important games come playoff time. Owners are alarmed, one of the people said, that this negotiation has been as challenging as it's been. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Saturday/Sunday, April 4th to 5th, 2026 issues of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Julian Wong. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability